Welcome to the Intimate Marriage Podcast, where I teach educated, successful couples how to have incredible, passionate relationships so that you can stop compromising and start feeling fully alive in your relationship. I'm your host, Alexandra Stockwell, aka the Intimacy Doctor. I'm a physician and an intimate marriage expert. My husband and I have been married for 26 years. We have 4 children and full professional lives, and we've created an amazing relationship. I've also shown hundreds of couples how to do so as well. If you want to deepen your understanding of your own relationship and learn to access new heights of emotional, sensual, and erotic intimacy, you're in the right place. I will show you how. Now let's dive in. The biggest reason relationships fail, do you know what it is? It's not what you probably think it is. I mean, after all, people can be married for, well, obviously for a day, but I'm really focused more on 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. People can be married a really long time, and it's easy to think that where things went wrong, it's this sophisticated, grown-up issue. In fact, right now, the population with the highest rise in incidence of divorce is the 50 to 70-year-olds. It might be 55. I don't know exactly, but it's people in that generation who've been married for at least 20 years. And often 30 or 40, they are the ones getting divorced most often per number of couples in that age bracket. So it's easy to think like the issue is complex and it's hard to understand why couples are separating after so much life together. Or really, even with a shorter marriage, why it's ending after 5 years when obviously any couple that gets married, putting aside marrying for a green card or for safety or, I don't know, a 16-year-old who wants to move away from home and that's the only way to do it. But, I'm talking to you who you dream of a life together and when you get married, you expect it to be forever. And yet, statistics show that's not even true half the time. And particularly with people in longer relationships, the divorce rate is rising. And so it looks like this very complicated problem. But it's not. The expression of the problem, the symptoms of the problem can be infinitely complex and varied, of course, but the fundamental issue, the core of the problem is actually very easy to boil down. It's that you need to know what you want and be able to communicate that well. If you know what you want and you can communicate that well, and are willing to hear what your partner wants too, that truly is the magic formula. In fact, I talk a lot about intimate marriage and the 6 keys to an intimate marriage. And even though they are, I don't use the word desire in any of the keys, in fact, they are very related to knowing what you want and knowing how to communicate about it. Because that is the through line. That is the oxygen that is missing in all of the different environments or areas of a marriage where things are disconnected, sour, angry, etc. Because whether you have poor communication or dissatisfying sex life or things with money aren't clear or clean, or there's just not enough of it, or you want more collaboration to feel more like partners in parenting and managing the household, or whatever it is that where You want to feel seen and heard, honored and respected and cherished. All of it comes down to being really clear what you want and learning how to communicate that in a way that makes it actually feel good to give it to you. Let me say that I was not born with this clarity, even though, like, it's the kind of thing we should learn young. In fact, 2 and 3-year-olds are pretty good at knowing what they want. I wouldn't say they're always that good at communicating about it in a way that makes you want to give it to them, unless they just wear you down, but that doesn't count. But somewhere between 2 and 3 years old, when we are clear what we want, and when we get married and have been living with our spouse, we learn that we just need to perform. We need to get things done. We need to be disconnected from our deepest essence and desires. And, I don't know, maybe that's not all bad. It helps us do well in school because maybe if we got really honest with ourselves, we don't feel like studying or taking that extra shift or whatever it is. But I'm not actually here to philosophize about all that. I just want to say that we get disconnected from our desires, and that is what turns things sour. Now, if you had told me this when I'd been married a few years, I probably would have politely just walked away and not continued the conversation, because desires, it just was a little bit of a creepy word. I knew well about goals and accomplishments and achievements, but desires was such a like a kind of fluffy word for me. But when I really began my journey, not just to be an accomplished woman, but to be an embodied, powerful, magnetic woman, which is what happened on the way to creating the extraordinary marriage I have, I was basically given the assignment to write down my desires. Now, let me be clear that I thought this would be a really easy assignment. It wasn't. I could have spent hours complaining about what I didn't want, how I didn't want to feel, how things weren't working, how my husband was disappointing. I didn't go around complaining. That wasn't really my personality then or now, but I could have found a way to express my dissatisfaction. When I was given this assignment in a class to write down my desires, wasn't your typical kind of class, but anyway, I just was kind of blank. I got out a notebook and a pen, and I could write down that I wanted my house cleaned, or I wanted more money. But when the question was, how do I desire to feel? How do I desire to be touched? How do I want to feel when I wake up in the morning? What do I want to nourish and inspire me in my marriage? What do I desire that is coming from my body, whether or not I approve, whether or not I think it fits with who I am? What is actually living there? Because we do not choose our desires. We have so many voluntary choices in our life about how we spend our time, and even to a degree what we're thinking about, all kinds of things. But our desires, we can't control it and we cannot choose it. The only thing we can choose is whether we're aware of our desires and how we respond, whether we ignore them, whether we're in denial, whether we write them down and consider them, whether we try to make them come true, that's where all the choice lies, but not in what it is that we want. So writing down my desires was actually a very confronting experience. And in the process, I saw all kinds of patterns because there were some desires, like some kinds of desires that I had easy access to. The ones that I didn't have access to had to do with my emotional life, my sensual life, my sexual life, and also at the time, anything that was too expensive was super confronting, and I didn't know how to really let myself feel the desire for that. Now, what was too expensive in my 20s versus my 30s? There was some evolution. And even now, if there's something that just floats across my consciousness that I'd like to have it, but I'm like, oh, I can't have that. And I notice, oh, it's the too expensive thought again. And so I need to work that through. But really the area that I just felt kind of clueless was about how I wanted to be touched, what I wanted our sex life to feel like, how I wanted it to evolve. This was so fundamental for me to figure out, except figure out is the wrong term because that's an intellectual term. It's more like to allow. I kind of needed to have a beginner's orientation and just let myself write things down, even if they felt silly to me. And this really was one of the most profound pivots in my journey. And let me say, it didn't involve my husband at all. He didn't do anything differently. It really had to do with my relationship with myself. And this is so foundational that I've actually created a course. It's for women only. It's called Desires, Awaken the Woman Within. It's my least expensive course. I want it to be available for any woman who hears this and wants to be more aware of what you want and how to communicate about it. It's a pretty short course, but it is deep and potent because in it, I'm talking about how you identify what you want, how to be right with it, and how to ask for it so it feels really good to give it to you. Because as I've said many times before, having a fantastic relationship is a learnable skill. And having a beautiful, nourishing, turned on, gratifying, edgy, yummy relationship with your desires, that also is a learnable skill. And it's exactly what I teach in this program, Desires, Awaken the Woman Within. But I want to just tell you a few stories. I've shared my own, and I'm thinking of a woman who she'd been married for 15 years. She and her husband were really devoted to one another. And she just felt like things were a little bit flat between them, a little bit stale. And so I asked her, "What do you want?" And she literally had no idea. Now, if I had asked her, "What does each of your children need? What are you going to make for dinner tonight? How might you be a more supportive spouse to your husband? What are the next things you're going to focus on in terms of your home and improving it or doing repairs?" I could have asked her all kinds of things about her work. This was a competent woman who always knew what was next. She actually had a very detailed schedule. Once she showed it to me during one of our sessions, and it was color coded because this is a woman who knew how to get from A to Z, how to get from wherever she was, identify what needed to happen, and make it happen. She was outstanding. But when I asked her, what do you want? What do you desire? She actually had no idea. And this pivot for most women is a pivot from focusing on what you're doing to how you're being. Because when you're more in touch with how you're being, how you're feeling, what's living inside you for no particular reason, it's not to get you somewhere to create a particular result, that's the realm where desires live. It's also the realm where orgasms percolate. It's a realm of tremendous creativity. It is a realm of vitality and aliveness. And so if you want more aliveness, more vitality, more gratification, more passion, both with your spouse and just all together in your life, to be a more passionate person, the very best way to do that is to focus more on your desires and awaken the woman within you who actually has a lot of desires that will come out when you make it safe for that to happen. So in the process, you're also going to add a lot of beautiful energy to your marriage, and things are going to open up and feel alive, the very opposite of stale, because just knowing what you want already is transformational. And this really is a setup for the second part, which is communicating it. I can't even count how many couples I have coached where specifically the women, having been with their partners for many years, had actually identified desires and were certain their partners would be a flat no, and so never brought it up, and also felt like they were dying inside. In fact, I have two couples in mind, and they had opposite desires. It's just an ironic thing that they both come to mind. But anyway, one really devoted, beautiful, passionate couple with a lot of aliveness and vitality in their marriage. And she really, really wanted to talk about exploring ethical non-monogamy. In other words, consensually agreeing to her being able to spend intimate time with another man. And she was certain that her husband would just be a complete no to this happening, that he would not feel safe, would not consider, just out of the question. Then another couple where they met in circumstances where they weren't monogamous and they never really closed the container of their relationship, and he continued to spend time with other women in a way that was part of their understanding when they got together. And now, many years in, she had this growing desire that was kind of like a little snowball that had grown big enough to be an avalanche. And she really wanted them to be monogamous and have the kind of commitment that is part of a monogamous relationship. But because of the way in which they met and the context of the beginning of their relationship, she just felt like she couldn't say it. So in coaching each of these couples with their opposite desires, both of them having strong relationships, Well, each one of them was just blown away by the love and willingness their partners had to receive the desire. Now, that does not mean that the monogamous husband said, "Sure, no problem. Let's just do our marriage differently." No, that's not what he said. But everything in their relationship changed when she had the experience that she could feel this desire while being in this marriage. She did not need to either disconnect from that desire or pursue it, but outside of the marriage. Do you see what I'm saying? It's kind of a subtle point. This has nothing to do with what actions they took. That's actually irrelevant for the point that I'm making. What's so important is that she knew herself well enough to realize this was a desire she had and to be able to bring it into the relationship. And he could receive it. He didn't think to himself, "This is not the woman I married. This is not what we agreed to." He just expanded to understand that the incredible woman in front of him had this desire. This is really a great example of uncompromising intimacy, where instead of compromising and not saying something so your partner is comfortable, to instead find the way to say it so it can be heard. And this woman got to be seen and received and loved in a way she hadn't even dreamed would be possible. And that was the significant thing, that there was no part of her that was too much for this marriage, because she identified what she wanted and she learned how to communicate about it. Similarly, the other woman who found the courage to say, "I know that we set things up when we got together in a particular way, but I'm a woman who grows and evolves. And what I've grown and evolved into is a woman with a massive desire to experience monogamy with you." And she almost couldn't maintain eye contact because in sharing this desire, she thought she was jeopardizing the relationship. But I coached her on how to communicate this in a way that was clean and clear, not clingy, not victim-y, not dominating, just simple and honest, in a way that he felt her love and her loyalty to their connection and the way they'd created it. And he said, "I'm so glad you told me. And let's keep talking." And eventually they decided to do an experiment and live by her desire for 6 months and then reassess. I've used these examples because they're kind of ultimate examples when it comes to marriage and desire. But don't be fooled by that. I just wanted it to be really clear. And in fact, this is true about speaking your desire when it comes to which restaurant you want to go to for dinner tonight. If your family loves Italian food and you always go to Italian food, but what you want is Vietnamese food tonight, well, do you first of all let yourself feel that desire? Do you claim it? Do you allow it to be? And then do you communicate that about it in a good way? Do you communicate about it without resentment, without making everyone else's love of Italian food wrong or taking it personally? There is a way to communicate about that that could have your whole family excited about going for Vietnamese food, or about you going for Vietnamese food, or about everyone getting takeout from any number of different restaurants. There are so many beautiful ways to navigate it if you, first of all, know what you want, and second of all, prioritize communicating about it in a way that's going to actually serve you and make it feel good to collaborate on your dreams coming true. I'd really love to know what you think of this episode, so by all means, send me a message. My contact information is in the show notes, and so is the link to Desires Awaken the Woman Within. This is something that, in its own way, applies to every single relationship, to every single woman. And so I would really love to know what speaks to you in what I've shared, and also, what do you want? Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Intimate Marriage Podcast. If you're ready to deepen your relationship and create a truly intimate, delicious, and vibrant marriage, head over to alexandrastockwell.com and choose the program that's right for you.